Hi, my name is Bruno and I'm a technical educator at the Web3 Foundation, and I'm here at REIMAGINE 2020, ready to reimagine Web3.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Reimagine 2020, the Halloween edition of Tales from the Crypto. This is our fourth event within the Reimagine series of conferences. I'll be your host today, Adam, with the MouseBelt team. If you missed out on any of our past three events, feel free to visit the Reimagine 2020 website at ri2020.io for full access to over 150 interviews from some of your favorite projects and individuals in the space. One of our main goals is just to talk shop with top projects, leaders in the industry, to shed light and help us understand blockchain's real impact and innovation, advancements towards Web 3.0, and the decentralized infrastructure of our future. So without further ado, let me go ahead and give you a quick introduction to my guest today. Super excited to have him back. This is I believe, his second time on the Reimagine conference circuit. If you missed his first discussion, you can go back to the Reimagine 2020 YouTube channel. He also did an extensive, lengthy, nice workshop first time around. So go ahead and that's also on their YouTube channel as well. But let me go ahead and not talk so much. How you doing, Bruno? And thank you for joining us.
Hey, happy to be here. Thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure to be here and kind of re-enter the circuit.
Exactly. So, I've been talking to your team for quite some time, and super excited to have you as a guest. A lot of things been going on over the last 12 months. Some of it we talked about in May. Some of it have just been over the last, couple months. And, the objective of this conversation with you is just to kind of get some updates. What's been going on, shed some light on a couple of internal projects that you guys have been working on for like the last 12 months. So again, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you taking the time out. And let's go ahead and kick this thing off. Yeah. So, let's get into like one of the projects that you guys started a year ago, Kusama. A lot of people understand the Web3 Foundation. They hear Polkadot, they hear Kusama, they hear Parity, all kinds of internal, different types of projects. Can you kind of shed some light on some of those before we get into the nitty gritty of what you guys have been working on? Shed some content.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Web3 Foundation, like our primary goal is pushing forward the Web3 infrastructure that'll power everything else, right? But the kind of like flagship projects of that effort are Polkadot and Kusama. So we have been like heads down focused on those two and those two alone for the past 12 months and years prior to that. And we don't really have any plans to diverge in the near future because there's still a lot of things to wrap up, still a lot of things to research, to deploy, and to launch this year and the next year. So lots of new things in the pipeline, but all in the Polkadot and Kusama kind of context.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think and there's two different perspectives, right? The Polkadot and the Kusama. Can you kind of go into the differences of those two? And then I kind of want to lead into Kusama after. But I think there's some main differences. Definitely interesting experimentation, different ideas and concepts like underlying, fundamentally underlying both of these projects. And maybe you can talk to that.
Sure. So Kusama launched over a year ago now, I think. Yeah, it was definitely.
Yep.
It just actually it recently had its birthday and we didn't celebrate. I'll have to correct that. So Kusama was launched from the same source code as Polkadot, and it was intended to be the canary network. So it's like a network that's an experiment, not a test net. It has an economic value, and we need economic value to incentivize people to do bad things. So if you can't profit from abusing the network, then you're not going to try abusing the network. So we have economic value, we have purpose to the network, and the network has a life of its own. I mean, it started as kind of like a canary net for Polkadot, but by now it's diverged from Polkadot significantly. We still do use Kusama to first try out new modules and things that we developed for Polkadot. And that's been working swimmingly. And then some of those things might end up on Polkadot, others will not. There are some modules that are too edgy, too crazy to just even ever exist on Polkadot, but they have a comfy home on Kusama. And Polkadot is, on the other hand, like a very stable, conservative, slower to upgrade, but extremely careful network that people and governments want to kind of people, governments, and huge projects want to rely on and want to depend on. So those are basically the key differences. But like I said, the networks have significantly diverged in the last year.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal. And I think some key points to take away is that, and maybe you can continue to touch on it on the Kusama side, is that it's not, as you mentioned, it's not a test net. It's an experimental platform and network to launch things, try things. What's the idea behind that? And then two, you touched on economic or economic value incentives on it. How did you, or how do you incorporate that in terms of not like surpassing Polkadot, or having the right enough economic value to have an experimental platform and want to engage developers and users, but not to exceed, I guess, Polkadot's kind of the long term, to not interfere, I guess, with Polkadot's usage as well.
Yeah, so fundamentally they cater to completely different audiences. This is like, you can think of Kusama like your garage band concert. Like you have a band in your garage, a couple of people show up, they bring some beers, they call their friends, it's all fun, we're all enjoying it. And the playlist can change while it's going on, right? People can scream, play this, play that, and it'll change, and everybody's going to have a fun time. Maybe a speaker is going to turn over, maybe somebody's going to spill a beer on your MacBook, and you're not going to be able to press play anymore or something. It happens, but everybody's going to have a great time, and people are going to, like, the musicians are going to hone their skills regardless, and people are going to enjoy some good music. And Polkadot is like a symphony, and it's really slow to evolve. It's not going to have these rapid changes. It's not going to welcome unplanned changes. It needs, like, if you want to change a symphony, it needs a lot of discussion from the composer, from the theater in which it's being played, the arena, from a lot of exercise, a lot of practice from everybody who's performing it. Everybody needs to be ready. Everybody needs to know their part, and there's little to no room for any kind of improvisation, right? So this is the fundamental difference there. Kusama is hacker friendly. It's like the original kind of hacker space where you can basically, whatever you come up with, you can deploy. Polkadot is something that will only accept matured projects from Kusama or elsewhere, and it's going to be very picky about what it adopts. One example is I recently decided to add, like, Kusama and Polkadot, neither of those have smart contracts, right? So you can't really do logic on them. You can't really build apps on them because they're meant to be the central chain that coordinates all the other connected chains to them. So these central relay chains, they need to be as lightweight as possible because they've got their plate full as is. They need to kind of juggle all of these connected chains. They need to juggle the incentives, the validation, the stuff that makes the entire network work. So that's why they don't have smart contracts. Smart contracts would kind of choke the network a little bit. But I wanted to add, because the NFT craze is alive and well in other blockchains, especially in Ethereum, I wanted to add the ability to have NFTs on either one of those networks. And from the get-go, Polkadot was a non-starter. And that's because every chain that's based on Substrate, and that's the framework that Kusama and Polkadot are both built on, has this special functionality that lets you graffiti the chain. So you can put a graffiti into the chain that'll get emitted alongside a block. That's called a system remark. And everybody who's running a node for either of those chains will see that remark. And so whatever I put in there, everybody else is going to see it. And now if you take that concept a little further, if you format a message in a slightly specific way, you can basically make it so that people understand it in a certain way. And so I built an NFT system on top of that custom messaging, where just by reading a message that looks like a specific string, you basically created an NFT. And then if you want to make a new one, you would make a different type of message of a similar standard. And if you want to trade them, sell them, and so on, all of this has their standards. But every insertion of such a message into the chain, like every graffitiing, carries some weight. You put some bytes into the chain for good, and the nodes that are running have to store those bytes. So this is kind of like a creative abuse of the network, and it has a purpose. It's interesting. It forces NFTs onto a chain which really didn't want NFTs, right? But since it's Kusama, it's perfectly fine. And I'm running this on Kusama, and it's like I'm currently developing some libraries for it, but on Polkadot that really wouldn't fly, because Polkadot is too careful about its state size, about not being abused, and just generally not being as playful with different scenarios. So this is why I launched this on Kusama and Kusama alone. And this is why we have that on Kusama. So custom hacked onto Kusama NFTs that people can use today without waiting for smart contracts to show up in Kusama or Polkadot and so on. So this is the fundamental difference. Like Kusama is open to these playful, hacky things that really you just, come to you under the shower, and you just come out, sit down at the computer and code it up, and you don't actually have to answer to anybody.
And what are you seeing in terms? How does Kusama allow this flexibility, this kind of hacker experience? What are some of the technical aspects that allows Kusama to function like that, where you can come in and experiment, as opposed to Polkadot, which you said requires more mature. On the back end, why does Kusama allow you to hack away?
Technically, Polkadot allows this as well. They both share the code base that makes this possible. But transactions in Polkadot are more expensive. Deposits are more expensive for certain actions. And it's likely that if this project were to take off on Polkadot, there would be a push for a chain upgrade to make these transactions more expensive. So to discourage them. And this is entirely in the I'm speculating, of course, because this is entirely in the hands of the dot holders. So if the token holders decided that, wait a minute, this is bloating the chain too much, I vote we raise the fee for system remarks, and then they could vote that in, and that would automatically be enforced on the chain, and my entire project would be much more expensive. Nobody would use it anymore. On Kusama, people just don't care as much, to the point that there's a like a DAO, a society on Kusama, which lets you become a member if you get a tattoo of the chain's logo.
And does the project continue on even though maybe it got voted against on the Polkadot side? It still lives on the Kusama side?
No. So these are completely separate chains, their own ecosystem, completely different states, completely different databases. So whatever you launch on Kusama is not going to automatically exist on Polkadot. You have the same functionality, so you can use it.
No, but will it live on the Kusama side? If it gets voted against on the Polkadot side, you just worked on the Kusama network, your NFT project. Does it still live?
Oh yeah. So anything that gets kind of banned on Polkadot can live on Kusama and vice versa. So the two chains don't even share the same governance bodies. So you have the dot holders and you have the KSM holders, and each of those user bases is voting for issues on their own chain. So cool. Whatever the dot holders can vote for, the KSM holders don't have to, and the proposals won't be the same either. So if I make a proposal on one chain, that's not going to be mirrored on the other.
Oh, interesting. And then I think that's very important to note, right? Like if it congests the network, if there's too much kind of energy being spent on that side, it kind of manages it itself amongst the voters and the consensus, or to keep Polkadot what it was meant to be, as opposed to like some of these other congested networks, right? And high gas fees. I guess on the Polkadot side, you can kind of manage that through this process of the experiment, not transferring over on the Polkadot side to allow Polkadot to operate as it was meant to be.
Yeah, exactly. So not only can you optimize something after it's been deployed, you can change chain parameters that would make things better. You can also literally use the canary network that was meant to be used for this. So that's Kusama. So we'll be test driving things and checking how much it costs and how much it strains the network. And if it's a fun enough use case, if it's useful enough, it's going to stick around on Kusama. But it's also going to be a lesson for Polkadot, whether or not we should include that in Polkadot and whether or not it's worth it in terms of, state size, congestion and stuff like that.
Now, is there still opportunity if it doesn't make it on the first time around on being accepted on the being integrated on the Polkadot side? Can you make some adjustments and try again?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's nobody really, it's a permissionless platform. So there's no one stopping you from even succeeding the first time. It's just maybe not going to be as optimal as you would want it to be. So if I deploy the NFT project on Polkadot today, it's still going to work and it's not expensive and it works fine. But there's a chance that if it really takes off like I want it to take off, that it's going to start making problems for the various nodes that are running and growing their database a little too much. And then, the maintainers might intervene and there might be a new proposal in the works that'll make things more expensive. That's not going to stop the project. The project is still going to work and all of the NFTs are still going to be there. It's just going to be a little more expensive to publish these types of transactions. So really, as a permissionless platform, it's not preventing you from doing anything, and nobody's there to veto your app, and you don't have to ask anybody for permission. But in terms of optimization, you could definitely learn from what other people say about it and what you see on Kusama, and optimize it so that it's accepted on not just one but both networks. But I mean, fundamentally, neither of these networks is meant to support applications on the relay chain, which is Kusama and Polkadot. All of the application logic should be happening in Parachains, and this is why I call these experiments and nothing more, because really there's never actually going to be any application logic on these relay chains. There shouldn't be, because they have to stay lean and fast.
Yeah, and which is great, and it's interesting, and it's a great concept. Were you part of this this idea from when it launched last year?
Of which idea?
Just kind of the Kusama kind of idea of an experiment side, because I mean nobody else is doing this type of development, right?
There were some incentivized testnets from other chains. Yeah, I think Near had one and some others, but I joined well after Kusama has been planned. I mean, Kusama launched just a few months after I joined, so it's not. I wasn't there, but it was really really refreshing to see it, because we wanted to have a chain that can launch without audits. Basically, it's like an unaudited version of Polkadot that we could test in production. Audits give you one level of security, but actually seeing it in use, that's a whole different bag. And so this is why they were separate in these canary and mainnet version from the start. But things evolved, and we now have actual testnets for Polkadot, and those are used for just testing things. And Kusama is really it's not even a beta playground anymore. It's really its own network that has slightly different economic values and a slightly different purpose.
And what are you seeing on Kusama over the last 12 months? I know, I've talked with their team at the beginning of the year. I just talked with them, last week about, what's been going on internally, and we'll touch on some of this down the road. But I know DeFi is blowing up. I know the developer community on Polkadot has increased the amount of activity, so that's good. But before I get into that, what has been going on? What have you been seeing on the Kusama side that's been cool, interesting, novel ideas? What have you been seeing for the last, 8 to 12 months?
Yeah, well, I'd say the most interesting part was that we actually got the Treasury to work to do what we wanted it to be. So the Treasury, which is the on-chain balance that collects all fees from the network, and whenever anybody's slashed like a validator, that punishment is also sent to the Treasury, and a fair chunk of block rewards as well, under certain conditions. So that's a pile of money that just keeps getting bigger. And we were kind of worried on, we didn't want to waste it. We didn't want to throw it away, But we also really wanted good projects. We also really wanted to fund the ecosystem, and it didn't really, like, people didn't know what to suggest as a spending reason. They didn't really have any ideas to fund through the Treasury. But then over time that really changed, and so we got some super interesting stuff happening there. We funded a bunch of, I think, over a dozen projects by now through the Treasury. Those are not trivial amounts. One of the more interesting ones recently that we approved was in Vancouver. There's going to be an art show that does it's an exhibition that lasts 2 years. Wow. And it does augmented reality and integrates Kusama into that. So people are going to be walking through some AR labyrinths focused on Kusama. That's going to be a proper art project. I think their web address is actually artproject.io. But anyway, so that's just one of those. So we're funding these creative outlets for people to learn about blockchain, to tell everybody about what can be experienced here. There's another project that's been recently funded that's actually in the process of being funded. A team is going to combine robots and sensors with the blockchain. So that's kind of like a precursor to you being able to rent a robot on chain. So the robot's time would be tokenized, and you would, however many tokens you have, then you can rent the robot for some operations during that time. And you can see that in like a lot of different usages, like, I don't know, deploy a satellite and then you can rent it for a while to take some pictures from space. Deploy a Mars rover and then rent it for a while to drive it around. Deploy a sensor somewhere and then rent it out to people, like robotic integration with that. And these creative, weird use cases are what we're funding. And again, this is the divergence in the audience level. These types of proposals would have a much harder time passing in Polkadot because they're not seen as, I guess you could call it, serious enough,
Yeah, like more traditional, or
yeah,
typical type of projects. No, that sounds pretty cool. And so the Treasury function part, you guys were satisfied with that process?
Yeah, we were kind of initially worried about because the only governance body in these chains that can approve a Treasury spending is the council. And the council is a bunch of people who are voted in by the dot holders. I was initially worried about the council because it's possible that if you have large enough holdings, you can vote yourself into the council. But it turns out that the more seats you want, the more economically less possible it becomes, because you need to buy more and more and distribute those funds across different accounts. And these amounts are no longer trivial after a while. But also, Kusama's council has, for the most part, been very active in reviewing all of these. So there's very little. I was afraid of too much apathy and just generally people not being interested in checking out the proposals, not reading what's going on. The council being made up of just insiders and just being quiet on the matters and keeping the status quo. Not so. A lot of interesting people on the council. Sure, there are some sleepers, but the active ones are incredibly diligent. They will dive into proposals. They will put comments in the various forums where we discuss this sort of stuff. They will ask proposers for feedback, and it's actually turned into quite the interesting and active funding mechanism that I would actually recommend to any team to try out if they have any kind of creative idea to build on such a blockchain.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to hear you talk about, some of the concerns and challenges, because this is community driven and engagement, activity, active users, the appropriate incentivization to get what you want to be successful, which is projects and governance, which are all critical components to the life of these projects, the success. What has been the approach to, I guess, at first you were a little concerned, but now it seems like it proved it out a little bit with engagement. What has been the strategy, I guess, to help you engage the developer community, to kind of promote Kusama in general, and then what has been the feedback as far as what are their thoughts on engaging with this network? It seems like, as I mentioned earlier, and we'll get into it, the developer community on the Polkadot side, has been like exploding compared to the other blockchains in the world. So what has been the successes there, and how have you been able to execute? Maybe trial and error, I don't know.
It was definitely trial and error, but it would be unfair to say that it's all decentralized and community driven, because the council and these treasury operations and Kusama's governance in general really started flourishing when one guy called Raul took over the duties of council whip. And so this guy keeps an eye on all the proposals and just keeps pinging councilors to be active. And that's been absolutely essential. So it wouldn't be fair to say that it's all automatic and all in the hands of the council. He's been very instrumental in getting people to pay attention to the chain. Now, this is going to change when we have different mechanisms of getting pinged and of knowing when we are due for an action and so on. But right now, the human element in getting us to pay attention to different proposals and different things that are happening on the chain has been invaluable. Like, he has been instrumental there. And I'm sure that he's to blame for at least half the activity that we've done in the last 6 months or so. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we've fully embraced the kooky nature of Kusama. And so we have branded and advertised our blockchain in this way. Like, are you a hacker? Come build something that's going to break. If it doesn't, great. If it does, great. It's all good. So we embraced the retro aesthetic like many projects do. We embraced the expect chaos side of things. And we started approaching developer communities in a very aggressive way. I shouldn't say aggressive, but more like appealing, because we've
It sounds
done
fun. It sounds fun, like come break some shit, come build some stuff. Let's innovate. Let's push this thing to the boundaries. That's why we have
exactly
this specific network. That's not like you mentioned, it's not a beta or like a test net. It's a fully functioning, have some fun, spend the week in it. And we help promote, we helped with our university program, Kusama, a couple of the hackathons in the past and some of the events and some positive feedback. But it's good to hear the approach, right? Because it just sounds cool.
Exactly. So we have this hackathon on Gitcoin right now that just focuses on getting the basics down, so onboarding new developers. But we also had Kusama, which was like this epic several week-long hackathon that focused only on Kusama, and it was like, your hands are untied, do whatever you want. Let's see how creative you can make your project. And so there was a bunch of projects that did really wonderful things. And of course we rewarded them with pretty nifty rewards for those attempts. So with us, it's all about, like with Kusama specifically, it's all about embrace the hacker culture, embrace the hacker nature, support whatever edgy stuff is out there, and let people build. Don't ever try to get in their way. Give them everything they might need to build something, and see what comes of it.
Exactly. And I think it sounds like a good time to me, right? And it's probably why everybody's been positive and accepted of it. And going back to the governance part of it, as you mentioned, and it's important to note too, like when we talk about decentralization and governance and voting and stuff, it is difficult to get to that level that when I think of that, I envision like automation and just it's on its own. But it doesn't happen that way. And I think for the audience, right, that are thinking these things just are automatically on their own, and the governance takes place and like the application process. But at this moment in time, it's in phases. And what I mean by that is, as you mentioned, Raul, right? Like there's still some human touch to a lot of these things to kind of get it. You need some structure, right? It's not going to you don't just push play and it's going to be chaos. It'll be like, nobody will vote. You definitely have some human touch in there, and it's interesting. And I'm glad you mentioned that to kind of elaborate a little bit on what decentralization is, and we're getting there, and we are there, but there's still some human, there's still some teammates that are working on this stuff to make sure that it's going in the right direction and that it just doesn't fall apart.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Raul doesn't have any kind of special powers or anything, and I mean the council doesn't have special powers per se either, but it's just that everybody defaults to not doing anything when things are going well. And so when somebody submits a new proposal, everybody who's involved would have to not only notice that proposal, but also get intimately informed about it, and then put down some capital and basically spend money. Because right now, if you're just a user, just an average user, you don't have an incentive to vote, right? You will spend a transaction fee and that's it. So it's not exactly appealing to be an active observer and voter unless you're really a fan of this blockchain, like a few of us are. So this is why we need this active interaction. Now we are working on some incentive schemes that are, again, quite kooky. On Kusama, for example, we are developing right now an option to wrap your on-chain actions into a lottery ticket. And so whenever you do something on-chain, you can also wrap it in a lottery ticket that you will pay a little bit extra for. And everybody who pays in such a way for an action on-chain, like voting for something or submitting a proposal, will enter this pool, this lottery pool, and the pool is going to be funded from everybody's ticket price. And so a few people who participated this way will get this prize divided by the number of winners. And this is going to add some more incentivization that'll make people participate in the governance.
And are you're talking about kind of the average user? This is
yes,
mechanism.
So this is the average user.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, there's so many, users, participants, but it depends on to what degree. And then you have a voting aspect, which requires, knowledge and more focused on kind of the network. So what you're saying is this lottery ticket mechanism allows the average individual, token holder to participate.
Yeah, I mean, everybody can participate,
Yeah.
but they have no reason to because they spend transaction fees. But this will allow them to kind of get something more out of it. And maybe this will be enough to encourage them to also keep their money off of exchanges. Because right now it's too easy to just drop your tokens into an exchange, get your annual or whatever income from their staking program. But what that does is it gives tremendous power to that exchange, because that exchange holds all the tokens from everybody else, and then they can vote on things.
It kind of goes back to a centralization a little bit.
Yeah, so this is not healthy.
And what you're saying too applies to not only the exchanges, but I guess other types of staking mechanisms where you delegate and in all these various ways, right? And I think this obviously puts a control back into myself and feel I have some skin in the game.
Exactly. So if you in order to participate in this lottery system, you would have to have your own keys, you would have to have your own money in your own wallet, and you have to issue the votes yourself. So again, we would be encouraging people to get their money out of these custodians and just into their hands again, and decentralize the holdings, decentralize the network, decentralize the governance a little more than it is right now. Again, it's all in flux. It's a process, but we're working on it.
No, I mean, I think that's important. I think in the industry, as of right now, everybody's trying to understand what works, what isn't working. I mean, is anybody else trying to incentivize, their community in this type of way? I don't think so.
No, but that's also because no other blockchain has on-chain governance of this level.
I see.
There's no other blockchain that'll let you upgrade the blockchain itself through an on-chain governance vote. And that's like everybody else sees that as too dangerous. So Polkadot is definitely, Kusama is the pioneer here. So that was the first network that enabled people to upload a new runtime, a new logic core to the chain itself, and have it automatically obey it if people vote yes. That's crazy dangerous if, it somehow gets corrupted and hijacked. But as it turns out, without testing, that would have been just all theory. But since we launched it on Kusama and tested it in production multiple dozens of times, we see now that it actually does work. And Kusama has been updated over 100 times through this mechanism.
That's super cool. And you touched on it a little bit, and I think it's the understanding of Kusama and kind of the environment that it provides to the developer community. But what's been this like rise in developers on just kind of Polkadot and Kusama outside of it being cool? The tooling up to, the tooling, the resources, the documentation, what's kind of driving this? Because it's surpassed some of the other blockchains, over the last, I forget, the report just came out like a couple months ago. And that's awesome. And I just, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors at play
Yep.
here, and a lot of things we still have to do that I'm not personally happy with and I want to help improve. But what did drive this is not just, the novelty is a big part of it. But once the message started getting through that with Polkadot, you will not, that, the media is always kind of trying to trip us up by with those headlines, Polkadot is the Ethereum killer. No, it is not. Polkadot is the tide that rises all boats, and what it's gonna enable is it'll add different functionalities to all the chains that connect to it. So if I have a privacy chain and I connect it to Polkadot, and Bitcoin and Ethereum are already connected to Polkadot, then both of them get privacy features through this. So every new feature that we add through a new connected chain will be inherited by all the connected chains. And that's the important kicker here. And so people realize that by building on this, they're building on the real new Web3 infrastructure. Then there's the other aspect of Substrate. And Substrate is the framework that powers these blockchains, Kusama and Polkadot, but also the framework that lets you spin up a custom blockchain in an hour, which is the workshop that I did last time. And so by using Substrate, you can get your own application-specific blockchain very quickly, and we have excellent tutorials that help people do exactly that, and that teach them how to interact with that chain through JavaScript, to web apps, through whatever else you need. So people are really taking to this and really building super interesting custom chains, to the point we now have over 100 chains in production, in development, that are all planning to become parachains eventually on Polkadot or Kusama. So it's a huge ecosystem in the making. This is not like a staged rollout where we're going to have parachains and then a year of nothing, and then some chains are going to come up and so on. Like when Parachains launch, when this ability to connect chains to Polkadot or Kusama launches, there's going to be ready candidates on day one. They're going to connect right then and there. And so this system is ready to blow up whenever the parachain connectivity stuff launches. And then, of course,
pretty soon. Is that launching pretty soon, Q4, Q1, or?
Well, it's in testing phase, so it's, it'll be when it's ready.
Yeah.
But it's like we've had this testnet that powers 5 or 6 parachains already for live for a while now, and some of the candidate parachains have been testing it. It also has some built-in parachains from Parity's end, and it's been working pretty well. So we're waiting for a more rigorous test of that. Whenever that's ready, it is first going to Kusama. So Kusama is first going to get parachains, then it's going to be tested for a while there. And then if all works out, then it's going to be added to Polkadot. So Polkadot definitely not this year. Kusama might happen this year with a big stroke of luck. We'll see. But in any case, it's, there's a bunch of projects already that are committed to be Kusama only. There's a bunch of them that are committed to be Kusama and Polkadot, so they'll launch 2 times and they'll keep alive both of their versions. And then there's those that are waiting for Polkadot alone to happen.
And what are parachains?
Parachains are parallel chains. They are basically different blockchains that connect to Polkadot. So you have a blockchain that is specific in use to some scenario, like Bitcoin is just very expensive, very slow digital gold that does nothing. So if you can bridge that to Polkadot and connect it, and then it'll just inherit all of the functionality that other chains brought to Polkadot. Or maybe there's a parachain. So for example, a team called PureStake recently built Moonbeam. And Moonbeam is a chain that is a clone of Ethereum, but it's built on Substrate. So it has all of the EVM functionality. It has all of the RPC endpoints, that which basically in human means that it can interact with all of the Ethereum tooling that already exists. So if you have MetaMask, if you have Ganache, if you have Truffle, if you have Remix, all of those tools automatically work with this chain that is based on Substrate and is literally a copy of Ethereum. I had recently a workshop where I just copied, pasted my old Solidity code into Moonbeam, and it worked. So it was just a raffle, digital raffle. It just worked. I deployed it, and people could use it on their public testnet. And Moonbeam is also going to be a parachain, which means that they are planning to connect to Kusama and Polkadot, thereby giving Ethereum smart contract functionality to Kusama and Polkadot. Wow. So parachains are just chains with very specific functionality that want to connect to the broader ecosystem of Kusama and Polkadot, and that can bring their special functionality to everybody else who's already connected there.
What a network effect that's going to be, right?
Yep.
Get everybody developing. And then, again, this is kind of our educational conferences, right? We've got 4 of them now for our students and universities. How easy is it to and you touched on a little bit, and we do have a workshop that you can see on the Reimagine 2020 channel. Just go to the Web3 Bruno workshop. How easy is it for them to spin up using or leveraging Substrate?
So in terms of getting started, if they just go to substrate.dev and into the tutorials section, they can go through the first 4 tutorials there in under 2 hours. And those first 4 tutorials will have them build their own blockchain 4 times and customize it, and basically use all the basic functionality that they can imagine in there. And that's gonna really prime them, really prepare the ground for them to explore on their own, because then there's also other tutorials and other recipes in a recipe section that's very specific in terms of a problem you want to solve. So it's very easy to get started with. Now, to be an expert in it, it's very difficult because it's Rust-based. Rust is not exactly a simple language. If they don't have experience in it previously, they would have to learn through Substrate by example, and learning Rust through Substrate is kind of like learning JavaScript to jQuery. So it's not exactly the healthiest way to learn Rust, but it's a great way to learn Substrate. So it's possible. It's very easy to get started. It's very hard to become a pro, but that's why we have all of these Riot channels and help channels where people just, fly in, ask a question about what they're stuck on. One of the 100 or so pros that's in there is going to answer them, and will generally help everybody along. And there's also a Substrate Builders program where anybody who's building anything on Substrate that they intend to maintain long-term, that they want to have a life of its own, they can apply, and they will get hands-on guidance from Parity devs directly, like direct interaction, really hand-holding them through the entire process of getting their product out.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to highlight that really because we have some beginners here probably watching. We have some more advanced, and everybody in the middle. But I think it's important, that your team is focused on developers, obviously Kusama, like on the hacker mentality, Polkadot with a little more maturity. At the same time, you're providing a lot of resources for the developer community to understand how to develop, spur up a blockchain pretty quick. You have parachains, everything's kind of interoperable and composable. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to make sure that everybody, understood kind of the backdrop and context of what you guys have done for quite some time. And if anybody wants to partake, like they know where to go learn some more.
Yeah, there's one more aspect to that. That's right now a lot of the resources are focused on chains, And not everybody's interested in building a chain. Not everybody needs to build a chain. Like people might be coming from Ethereum or from Web 2.0, and they just want to build a web UI for an existing chain, or for Kusama itself, or for Polkadot itself, some analytics or a wallet or whatever else. So our resources are lacking right now in that department, in Web 2.0 developers, like how to onboard them. This is something I'm personally working on. And if anybody's interested in learning about that aspect, I encourage you to get in touch with me. There's also .leap.com, which is a site I started to host tutorials that just really break it down in a simple way, how to interact with a substrate-based chain from JavaScript. So this is going to help people who are web developers interact with any substrate-based chain. Kusama, Polkadot, Edgeware, Moonbeam, whatever chain you think of that's based on substrate, this is going to help you interact with it. And I would love to, like have people contribute with guest posts, or just get in touch if anything's unclear, how I can help, and build out that sort of that side of the education. So we do keep our web native developers in mind. It's just that up until now, the low level chain side of things has taken priority, and we are now trying to switch that around. So I'm personally very invested in getting people started with a web approach.
Nice. Yeah, and I think that's all important stuff, and people are coming in. And do you think at one, is there such thing as a blockchain developer, or the complexities there of being a developer, or specifically in blockchain? And then do you see the trend of not even needing to be a blockchain developer, and we could just, rapidly deploy blockchains and dApps and applications and use cases?
I can definitely see a career path that works with the blockchain, but doesn't require any blockchain knowledge at all, because ultimately the blockchain is just a very slow database that communicates in a very specific way. Mm-hmm. If you abstract that away enough, people don't have to know about the blockchain. Technically, on a technical level, from a high enough vantage point, the blockchain is just an append-only database that we've had for decades. It's called an event sourcing database, where all you do is just write events as they happen into the database, and then to get the final state of things, you just take the sum of the effects of all the events that happened. And that's literally a blockchain, where you go, one transaction did this, another did this, another did this, so our final state is this. That's a blockchain. That's an event sourcing database. So if you abstract that away enough, you can have an army of web developers who can work with this and do magic with it, without having to, ever touch on cryptography, ever touch on low-level networking stuff, on, stuff like that. So, but what worries me in that regard is that we might lose some of the ethos. So people who might be joining that because it seems appealing from a web development perspective, they might not be aware of why we are doing this. Why are we using this horrible database? And that's just the decentralization aspect. So what we are trying to teach at the same time is, you should care about the decentralization side of things, and then you can build stuff on top of it. Because if you don't care about the decentralization stuff, you might as well stay on Amazon or whatever you use to build your app.
Exactly. It's a mindset paradigm shift of Web 2. And we've been talking about this throughout all these conferences, right? And the decentralization and kind of being able to execute and maintain that kind of level of thinking, right? As you mentioned, it can kind of get blurred if it gets a little too easy, or the concepts are now pushed back because things have evolved from a technical standpoint. But I want to get back to the DeFi movement here, and there's been quite a few projects picking up on the Polkadot side. Can you touch on kind of the activity there? Akala, Mantra DAO, I don't know, some staff as a staffy. There's a lot of projects on your side that have been really successful in developing now on on Polkadot.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that? Yeah.
Sure. So all of these, DeFi is obviously crazy right now in Ethereum. So it's very popular to build something for DeFi, because obviously it works with people. People want DeFi, and of course, we want to bridge the DeFi worlds, right? The more people have access to all of these different DeFi worlds, the more volume there is in total across all of them, and the better it is for everybody, the more liquidity there is, and so on. So all of these different projects are now trying to, there are some of them who are doing unique things, but all of them are basically trying to emulate stuff that kind of exists on Ethereum in some way. And it's going to be a competition. So we are supporting all of them, and they're all doing amazing work. But ultimately, you can't really, there's going to be a limited number of Parachain slots on Polkadot, i.e. Kusama. So you can't really expect all of them to get a slot and become parachains. You're not going to have two virtually identical parachains connected to the ecosystem, because that doesn't make sense, and they're not going to get in, both of them or multiples of them. So right now it's kind of a race between all of them in terms of who can build the most coherent system with the most sensible features and get that into the Polkadot ecosystem in a way that allows people to play these cross-chain DeFi games. So while I'm not intimately familiar with how far along any of them are, they are all making tremendous progress. And this is particularly because they're all part of that Substrate Builders program that I mentioned. So they're all getting help from Parity and the experienced developers there, because we want them all to succeed in some way. We would not undermine a single one of them. We want them all to do their best work. And then we want the network to have the best of the best available to our users. So ultimately, it's going to be a very, very interesting development to see which of these chains, or maybe which few of these chains, succeed. But it's also going to be very interesting once we bridge to Ethereum, so that we actually get access directly to those DeFi products as well. And then it's going to start getting fun, because you'll be able to play with Ethereum DeFi across the entire Polkadot ecosystem through anything you want. Like you get some Bitcoin, you can launder it through Monero, then you can turn it into some token that can be sent to Ethereum into DeFi. Then you farm some potatoes with it, or whatever they call their newest token. Then you cash those out into DOT, and then you use those DOTs to stake and earn a percentage on your DOTs with the validators. So it's going to be a very interesting and crazy world.
And so I think and we got just a few minutes here. And so the long-term vision on this, I see Polkadot touching pretty much being interoperable with many chains across many networks.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it. Yeah.
And I was also reading just the other day, or I came across it, where like most projects can may not be able to afford, I think, like the bond requirement to launch some of these things or lead. And the concept behind that's pretty interesting, where you can have some financial support. And back in the day, it was ICOs, like ERC20 tokens, and like, you launch a product, they invest, and then there were some scams and that kind of narrative, and under-delivered and all that. It seems like you guys also tackled that kind of incentivization or support for some of these projects wanting to launch by leveraging other token holders that can maybe vouch for you. Am I understanding that right?
This is what the naming of this is still in flux, because we want to. It was initially called the initial Parachain offering, but since that acronym is too close to IPO, it is now under discussion on what to rename it. So a couple of projects took Parachain lease offering. Why this is necessary is because in order to get connected to Polkadot, you have to win an auction to occupy one of those Parachain slots, because there are going to be a limited number of them. And you don't actually pay for that slot, but you lock up your tokens. You bond your tokens for the duration of that lease. And the way you pay for that lease is actually you forfeit the ability to gain profit on those tokens by staking them or using the market or whatever else. So this is basically your cost, your forfeited opportunity of profit. And when your lease expires, you get those tokens back. But given that these Parachain slots are going to be very scarce, it is quite likely that most projects are not going to have the funds in their bank to like solo fund this venture. And so this Parachain lease offering thing came up, where different chains, I think Fala had the first public post about it to ask their users on what they prefer in terms of preferences, in terms of, you know, how the investment will work, how they like percentages and pricing and stuff like that. The idea is that instead of staking your tokens in the system itself, in the relay chain, you would loan it to the Parachain through a specific module that's already built and exists in Polkadot. So if you have this chain, you can leverage this crowdfunding utility, and you would actually loan them your tokens, and they could use those tokens to vouch for to get that lease, to get that auction. But since it's your tokens now getting locked in that lease, you are forfeiting the right to earn stake and so on. So the Parachain has to come up with an incentive scheme that would actually rival or exceed whatever you're getting from the staking operation on the relay chain itself, so on Kusama or Polkadot. And this is what most projects are mulling right now, and trying to mathematically make sense of, like how much, when, what, you know, what price, and so on. So this is what's going on right now. And the Parachain lease offering is, we all think, going to be one of the primary funding mechanisms for these parachains. The idea is you lend them your tokens, they get the slot, and they pay you back in tokens of that chain, which are immediately liquid. So we'll get some bonus from that liquidity of those tokens when the Parachain gets that lease. And then you would also get your tokens back once the lease expires, if the Parachain decides not to renew it when it expires. A lot of nuance.
Unless I missed it, what's the risk on the loan? Is there any risk? Do you lose them if project goes under, or?
No. So the module for crowdfunding makes sure that you can't really lose your money. You would just get it back if it fails. If they don't get the slot, you would just get it back.
So it allows you, it's basically like a call option. It allows you to partake on the upside. Not a call option. You don't get the staking rewards, but you know, the flip side to miss, you know, the opportunity cost there reflects on the Parachain that you are loaning, and obviously, hopefully, you know, there's more upside. As you mentioned, you got to understand, or you know, you got to figure out the best way to incentivize that loan. But that's kind of the worst case scenario. You get your tokens back, and you missed out on the staking rewards. Best case is, you know, the project's successful, and you know, you earn that way.
Exactly. Yeah, you're going to lose a few months of staking rewards if it fails. But if it succeeds, you know, it might be, you know, high gain tokens or whatever. You know, I think it's a fairly decent trade-off there.
Definitely. And I'm assuming, obviously, if you're loaning them, you've done some due diligence, or you know, you have some insight onto kind of that project. But I think we got one or 2 minutes here, and I think, first of all, thanks for joining. Thanks for sharing, you know, all this information. It's interesting how the mechanisms within kind of the Web3 foundation between Polkadot and Kusama, with the lottery ticket to engage like the community, this kind of, you know, support for early stage startups that can't, you know, that need to bootstrap, the network of Kusama, like that hacker mentality. I mean, it all makes sense, and I can see why, you know, many developers are going towards you to start building projects. And you know, as I mentioned, the developer activity has increased, you know, quite substantially recently, and the DeFi aspect, you know, projects coming on board is pretty cool, and it's good to see.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so much we're doing to like kickstart all of this entire community. There's a bunch of stuff I could talk about in terms of, you know, like layer 0 functionality that we've built into these chains that help the developers. One example is we now have bounties implemented in the Treasury as well, which means that you can earmark a certain amount from the Treasury for future spending, and then the council of the chain decides who the curator for that bounty is. Then you assign a single expert who can gauge whether or not the task was completed successfully. And so you basically have an on-chain bounty system like Gitcoin, which will let you hire people to do certain subtasks and build out, parts of the ecosystem. And that's how we're funding a big part of the official UI for Polkadot. We are expanding it through bounties. So somebody else is building that, and the chain itself is financing it.
So everybody can get involved one way or another.
Everybody can get involved.
Right. Yeah. In one aspect of the development roadmap. Cool. I think we're over time here, but Bruno, it's always a pleasure to have you. This is your second time, at the Reimagine conference. Again, for those watching, he also has a workshop on our YouTube channel. Please visit that. What an interesting discussion, and we hope to have you back. We'll be doing this again next month, and maybe we can talk about some of that layer 0 stuff and get into the nitty gritty on the technical aspects. But appreciate you talking with me today, and we hope to talk again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure again.
All right. And where can people find you, or they want to learn more about what we talked about? Where should they go?
Well, I'm on Twitter, so @bitfalls. You can always reach me there. In terms of the educational stuff, you can just go to substrate.dev for the tutorials I mentioned. But if you have any kind of question at all on anything I mentioned or anything you're interested in, whether or not it makes sense to build your project on Substrate, whatever, just ping me on Twitter or just Bruno @web3.foundation. That's fine.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all for today. For all of you tuning in today, appreciate you listening to Bruno and I talk. So much information, and hope you enjoy the conference, and we'll talk again. Thank you, Bruno.
Cheers.